What we're going to talk about and tackle is this idea of how you drive sustainable Microsoft Teams adoption. In this session, we'll learn what the smartest organizations have done to get there. We're very, very fortunate to have a Microsoft MVP based out of Australia who's going to lead this presentation and share some of her learnings. Kirsty McGrath is the founder of AvePoint Solutions. Her main focus is increasing the consumption and adoption of cloud technology, and really more from a perspective of how can you drive business innovation, collaboration, communication, productivity, and better information management. Kirsty has worked with a lot of different organizations in different sizes across the region. So with that, Kirsty, thanks again for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, thanks, Dux, for that glowing introduction. Appreciate it. Getting in and kicking off, I know we're sort of starting 2 minutes early, but look, who's here? Let's get ourselves in and start to chat so that we can understand a little bit more about adoption to be doing. Is we're really going to be looking at, what is it to have sustainable adoption as well? Because sustainable adoption is an important part of going down the journey to something like Teams. It's not enough to just sort of get yourself started. And adoption doesn't stop here and there. So when I'm working with a lot of the organizations and what they've actually done, we'll go through a couple of those different learnings. So first of all, I'd like to actually welcome participants from right around the world. I know we've got a lot that have actually come in today, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land for wherever you happen to be in terms of this online session today. We do have some Australian-based speakers and participants that are located here, so we do want to pay our respects to elders past, present, and future. So kicking in, as we've stated, Kirsty McGrath, adoption consultant, AvePoint Solutions. So that's where I tend to, I suppose, as an adoption consultant and director of the company, I tend to focus a lot around, some of the core solutions and some of the theories that I suppose come with change management practices and training, and there are so many facets. What I did was I actually set up the Australian adoption user groups here because I wanted to try and bring together communities of people. So I'm really privileged to be able to hear not just my clients' journeys and taking them on those journeys for that matter, but I get to hear from change managers, comms, business analysts, those that are actually going on the journey past, present, project managers. So we all kind of come together and have some really good chats around what are our strengths in this space, our weaknesses as an organization, what could we do, and coming together as a community. And this becomes then really important because it gives me, I suppose, a lot of stories along the way. Some I can and can't talk about. Some I might probably talk more a little bit around it to be able to help us along the way. So the main themes that I'm going to discuss here is really, along those sort of buy-in and goals and, what is and what makes sensible adoption. So there are some core components we're going to focus on. And by the way, I'll make no guarantees in regards to things like the titles running across the bottom, subtitlings. You never know what's going to come out. So then themes, the buy-in. Okay, so in terms of some of the buy-in, and when I go down the journey of just getting started. Now look, the nature of what's happening right at this moment, globally with COVID, the buy-in is kind of, in some respects, been completely superseded of we just have to do it. So it's just being rolled out, forced out. We've seen a phenomenal increase globally in the usage of Teams. And so I'm going to touch a little bit on that along the way, because when a user is gone on the journey, sometimes some of the things that we might do to build the journey kind of comes to a bit of a screeching halt. So some of these things are going to shift and change along the way. So when I look at what an adoption journey might actually look like, and this is the sort of the standard road that I would go down. Now, whether it's already been rolled out, doesn't matter. We can still come back around and go on this journey again and again. It doesn't actually stop when we first kick off and get ourselves started. So we've got a lot of planning. We want to do a pilot. We want to kind of prepare and launch and then have a reinforcement program. Now, with COVID, of course, it's just gone straight to launch. Sometimes there is no prepare. We've had, 28, 48 hours. We're rolling it out. We're rolling it out now, whether you like it or not. So a lot of that of what came before might actually have gone completely by the wayside. Some of the organizations that I've been working with, those that were already on the journey to at least get themselves started and rolling this out, have seen some really great successes. And I'm talking with a lot of them around, well, what has made it that little bit easier for you in your journey to collaborating and communicating a little better when it comes to COVID and working remotely? And it was the fact that they'd already started on some of this journey. They had already migrated a lot of the content and they were just getting ready to sort of push the button. For others, it's been a much bigger struggle. And, I've had some good chats with them as well. So in terms of where I would get them started, and even if they have rolled it out, and I go, okay, we're going to start doing maybe just a ton of training for the time being. I go, well, I'm okay. That's okay. I'm happy to come in and just do some training. However, well, what's your vision for it? Okay, did you think about it? Your vision may have been, we've just had to roll it out, turn on the button. Okay, we're now there. But the vision doesn't mean that we've actually got the ability to be able to help our teams on the journey to where they want to go. Because if I'm going to start just jumping straight to training, I still have to understand, well, what benefit was it for them to continue on this journey long after? Or how can we convince them to do more than just chat? Because I'm seeing a lot where it's literally just chatting to each other and a mass amount of emails and meetings, yet they're not actually using the collaborative side of Teams. So I kind of go, well, how can we convince them, even if I'm just doing training on that adoption journey, how can I actually convince them that it's going to be better for them to maybe reduce down the mail and look at the collaborative side of Teams? So we come back to things like, what are some of the benefits? And Microsoft had worked with Foresters to have a total economic index around Teams. So we go through some of that and go, okay, what's one of the core components that we might be able to convince them? And we start to then build upon that around some of the benefits. So it's a really good white paper to go and have a look at. But I would often complete a visioning exercise, and usually it's with some of the key people within a business, executives and department stakeholders, those champions that might already be out there. And often we know those that are within the business that are the yes people, those that will come along and are really ready to jump on board and be able to help others. We'll have your project managers, so we'll bring those in. Maybe it's a mix of different people from throughout the business, because if you're going to talk to those that might have been a frontline person, they're going to need to be part of, well, what's the vision for someone from frontline? They've got a very different vision of how to utilize this technology compared to someone who's in the office. So we want to make sure that we're going to do a good visioning exercise, and you can do this remotely. And I have done quite a few of them, and it could just be a simple half day, but often it ends up being a little longer than that, because to try and drive to what success actually looks like takes a little longer than we sometimes think. It depends on how far down the journey they've already gone, but we want to know new ways of working that are actually going to make an impact apart from just maybe doing chat, for example. So then there is a lot of functional scenarios that are out there that Microsoft provide for you across all of the different industries. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. And this is what I'm seeing some real fallover within the business. They're kind of starting from scratch. Now, the fact that there's so much information already out there, and where do you go to? Microsoft have got their just pure adoption site, and I've got a lot of links throughout this presentation, and it's actually going to be provided to you so that you can repeat, and it's a process that you're going to repeat again and again, probably with the different technologies that are included, because Teams is quite a big beast when you have a look at what's included under it. So some of those use cases for the scenarios, if you're going in and you're going to do a workshop, it's going to then be important that we then start to have a look at things like the different scenarios that are there for the team that you're going to be working with. Trying to fit one scenario across the whole business doesn't necessarily always work. So therefore, we look at the different lines of business and how we can, if we potentially can, have one scenario, even better. But we're going to need to maybe have a couple. Now you can do one technology, okay, and then look at the different components, the little things that you can actually tweak that are going to work for each line of business. So that then becomes that core differentiator between each one of those in terms of a scenario. So one of these that I had done with some of the senior leadership pain points when we were running just a pure senior leadership workshop, because they were the ones that wanted to drive the way forward for a new way of working. Because when you think about collaboration communication, a lot of times new ways of working will need to come from a bit of a top down. Now, that's not saying that it doesn't come from a bottom up as well. That's going to be just as important, because those change champions are going to be those trusted people within the business that everyone else is going to go to find a new way of working. So it's got to come from both facets. So when we were working with the leadership and their pain points, these then became things that we could actually communicate as part of our comms, as part of the training. And do you know how hard it is when you're doing something like, that you don't feel connected in your meetings when you're working from home? And this is the way that now we're trying to address this for you. Sometimes there's been satisfaction. There's a lot of times I have satisfaction surveys, and there might be a real dip in satisfaction for a particular reason, and that might be the driving pain point that we're looking at to go forward in a new way of working. So we get sort of a scenario. Now, this was one that was done for a sales team. They actually do a lot of briefing and proposals. And, a lot of what we might do in a collaborative way is very similar across different technologies, but we want to be quite specific so that we can tell them we understand. So if we want to understand, then, we have to sort of go through a little bit of this in terms of the scenario to tell them and come back and go, we heard you. That's half the battle. If they feel that it's getting pushed on them, then trying to get sustainable adoption can be really tough, because if they don't feel heard, then we're not going to be able to bring them on the journey. We forced them on the journey. And a lot of people at the moment have been forced down the journey to teams. So we want to try and make them feel a little bit more comfortable wherever we can. So change network. Now, I see this a lot. Instead of having volunteers that are actually out there that are really good at taking on technology, that have a real passion and can communicate that and are trusted within the business, I've seen many that have been, as we say, voluntold instead. So I have them and they will come in online in classrooms, and they come from a little bit more of a negative space, or they don't have sometimes the tech savvy to be able to move forward. They're not necessarily someone trusted in the business. So we start to see a lot of these programs where they're falling over. Not only do they fall over, but it's hard to get sustainable adoption, because those that were change champions for that short period of time in the business then stop. At the end of that project, it might have been 3 months, it might have been 6 months, it may have only been even a 1-month program, because we do see some hard and fast programs going out there. If we've actually got them and they've been forced, they're not going to be there for the long term. They're not going to come down the road and actually learn how to do the next piece or the next piece or the next piece. We want to have continuous learning happening from the champions that are around us. So go out and actually put a special invitation out there and say, well, why do we want you? And it doesn't stop with just that initial getting started on the program either. Pretty much every time I'm in front of the business, or I've got the project in front of the business, or champions, or wherever, they keep asking. Because new people, we have a turnover in the space of 2 to 3 years. You have a 50% turnover in the business. You may have lost your change champions. So if that's the case, keep asking, would you like to come on this journey with us? Because people that may not be particularly tech savvy may be very heavily invested in learning. Your graduate programs, as they come on board, keep asking those guys as well. Because where I've seen a business that's actually had a continuous change champion program, we've seen some really great successes there. Is your help desk actually ready? if you're going to do some end user training, for example, make sure that they've actually been brought on the journey long before you start to train your end users, because they're going to pick up the phone and they're going to start calling your help desk. You know, if they've been forced down the journey of Teams as well, then they're going to need some training from the technical perspective as well. They need technical guidance. They need the governance guidance as to what, you know, your organization can and can't do as well. They need to be quite fine-tuned prep and constantly as well. So if you're going to send communications out to the wider business, make sure that you actually include them along with maybe some of the key senior leaders, and they have a targeted comms release going specifically to them as well, so that they're ready for whatever's going to come, rather than having a mass heap of, you know, phone calls hitting them. Cross fingers, if you're doing it correctly and people are excited and you've got a good community where you can go speak to your change champion and these are who they are to ask the question, you won't get a slammed help desk. That makes a difference. I'm seeing a lot of businesses trying to drive out these programs and they haven't had a look at some of the change constraints. For example, you know, not long ago, we went through end of financial year and I had a program going on where they were driving forward a big program and everything was starting to hit around the June period, at the beginning of June and going into July. Of course, guess what? Cancelled. The whole thing got cancelled. They then had to wait until after minimum mid-July to be able to get started. So therefore, they've actually wasted a lot of time and money, and they've been speaking to teams and driving out comms, and then all of a sudden it came to a screeching halt, and there was this really big kind of comms echo going on where they go, hang on, we were getting started, what's going on, where are we at? So be really careful about when you're trying to drive forward the change, and be considerate of what's actually going on in terms of saturation. And we did have some pretty big saturation going on, and you know, think about humans first, because it's not just about the tool. It's about, you know, we cannot learn when we're underneath a whole heap of stress. Because if we've got lots of stress going on, like when we went into lockdown and people were going through a lot of change, it's very hard to learn when we're under that kind of pressure. We don't have our listening ears on, as we like to say, in terms of some of the psychology around it. So just have a think about, you know, when you're going to drive forward something. Okay, so those are all important components. When it comes to the technology and governance is another theme. Now, there's a lot of really awesome sessions that are included as a part of the Shift Happens conference around governance. And, you know, AvePoint do a phenomenal job when it comes to governance. So I'm not going to drive into some of the governance. However, from an end user standpoint, it's phenomenally important. And when I'm driving forward on a particular program, some of the core things that I see as an issue is they haven't done something like as simple as, well, what document goes where, or turned off the old repository. So all of a sudden, they're putting it in the whole old, you know, SharePoint site and the new SharePoint site, and they've saved it to their OneDrive, and they're not sure about where it should be. Should it be in Teams as well? And I've also got to say that up to the new, to the old trim, or, you know, if you've got government type documents, you've got to lock in somewhere else. And we're seeing some phenomenal replication. So sometimes you look at the statistics around consumption and it looks like there's been a really big increase, and there's really not. And so we have to take into consideration, you know, making sure we're really clear around, you know, where your information should actually reside and how we're going to work with it. So some really clear comms around that, and some training and guidance and some of the rules around how you're going to do it. And then also be really realistic around what does the pain look like as they're moving through it. We try to do this, it's going to be absolutely fabulous. And I've seen it take down organizations. If you tell people this might be a little bit painful, what we've got is a bit of a transition period, and we're really excited about where we are going to be. Our future state within the next 8 months is we're going to be here, and we're going to make sure that we're really clear along the way what that looks like. So one of my clients did, and we created something a little bit like this, where we went, this is the old, you knew exactly where it needed to be. we're going to be transitioning you as a team from this date to this date. It's going to be sometimes, a little bit messy, but we will be shutting down that shared drive. And it may not be shutting down. It could even just be, please take it to read only. Because if you leave the old, people will fall back to old habits. And I saw this very clearly where shared drives weren't turned off for 2 years. And when they were turned off, documents were actually saved there, and people then didn't know where it was. They got confused as to where the document was saved. They thought it was in the new place and it wasn't. Show them physically how it's going to be in read only. You can copy it out of there, or we are migrating it, or you need to migrate it, okay, with clear guidelines around how exactly they're going to do it till you get to the new and the exciting way of working. Now, a lot of times as a part of that sort of journey around, tech, we will bring in and build some really awesome technologies to be able to help, because sometimes the extensibility of teams comes from things like the connectors and the bots. But be really clear and simple when it comes to something like bots. And when do you introduce it? Because they're going to need to have a good staggered level of training, of introduction, of movement to the new way of working. And maybe a bot right up front may not be the best way to actually start the journey when they're not even understanding how and where they should do conversations or chat, for example, and there you're trying to introduce a bot too. So be careful when and where you might introduce it. And if it's going to make it really simple and you've got a great way to be able to work, then absolutely jump in, because people will use the likes of Teams so much faster. And there are some really good bots out there to be able to help, like the Who bot, for example, within your organization, if it's all set up in the back end correctly. So then if we start to have a look then, and we're going to communicate, one of the biggest failings that we see as part of a lot of the ProSci research that's actually out there, and Microsoft is very focused on ProSci as a change management methodology when it comes to working with their technology. Communication offers one of the really big fall downs. We need to be careful around communication. Too much overwhelms people, of course. However, we've got to have very different ways of being able to communicate across a business. And considering we're in a virtual way of working, you have to have a look at the different ways that you can get to someone in particular. One of the businesses that I was working with had, and they're not really called lollipop ladies and men anymore, that it was a part of schooling and councils and all sorts of things. We had to physically send letters out to say we were rolling out Teams, and Yammer included, where they could come in and they could chat around ways that they could actually be and helping families and children be safe during COVID, for example. We were trying to create a really good community of bringing them together. But to get them started on this journey, we needed to physically send a letter out, and comms and flyers and pamphlets, and bring them on the journey. And a phone call was a follow-up support to go, how are you on? Have you authenticated? Are you ready? Can we help you with anything? Okay, so there are all components that we then needed to do to get them ready. We need them to understand, well, what is it? And even what is the cloud? Because a lot of people sometimes don't even realize what is the cloud, especially if they're for someone who is a lollipop individual out there who are on a crosswalk, for example. So we have to have a look at how we're going to communicate with them. Why do we need it as a business? That comes down to some of those visioning that we've done right back at the very beginning. Then there's some of the benefits that, how you can interact. It's a single source of truth, that we can work anywhere during these, and we can work smarter. So they're all the kind of the benefits that then we customize based on some of the workshops, and we understand exactly what we're trying to communicate to the business along the way. Now, Microsoft have some really awesome templates that are out there to be able to introduce something like Microsoft Teams. There's flyers, we're announcing it, these are new ways of working, it's on its way, it's about to start on this date, posters that you might put up around the business, for example, because we've still got a lot of people, essential workers, that are on site. So don't forget during this process, if you are going down the road of still building, and you're building for this virtual world, there is still a lot of people that need to go into the office or out there in our frontline workers. So make sure that we're actually targeting for both and not forgetting the fact that we've got, you know, a different workforce. So there's some of the different ways. They've also got, Microsoft have got a day in the life of. So these flyers, and there is a whole heap of really awesome ones there, including compliance, and these are some of the ones that I've just pulled out. You know, human resources. I've got a big, really big human resources program at the moment, and they're quite a vital place, sometimes even to start as a pilot, to go, you know, what does it look like to have a really good orientation for the business, and have them in as change champs, have them in as a behavioral way to be able to move the business forward. Or if you're going down the line for something like sales, and you can turn around in sales to potentially get really good statistics around, we've improved our sales cycle with clients, increased our profit by this margin, to go, we've done it well around collaboration and communication, to show the rest of the business as a part of a pilot. And make sure you leave a bit of time from the pilot to going live. Because if you don't test it properly, and if there are things going wrong, then you really need to leave a little bit of a gap. So we've got to fix things sometimes along the way. Now, there's things like also digital signage. This was one, it wasn't necessarily a Teams one. I grabbed one out there where we were doing pop-ups, and we were going around the business and we were showing them physically how to do different ways. So there were all these different sessions, and we've seen some really awesome ones. People are motivated by food. You know, we bought in donuts, and we bought in popcorn, and we bought in all sorts of things. And I've seen other programs now in terms of the virtual world where they go, it is worth us sending a small token of our gratitude out in the mail to all of our staff. And it could just be something simple as a letter with putting something in terms of the letter to say thank you. And I have seen them where they've been sending out even just little, you know, $10 cards that are for, you know, Woolworths or Coles or those sorts of things, to be able to help them in their journey, because a lot of people are struggling at the moment, saying, you know, thank you for all that you're actually doing. So different little rewards we've been doing in the businesses. So to get some sustainable adoption, we ultimately need behavioral change, because it's not enough to just push it out there. Pushing it out there gives us consumption. It does not necessarily give us adoption. Consumption being, well, everyone's been forced, all their documents are now in SharePoint, so they've got to open it from SharePoint. So it looks like you're kind of consuming in SharePoint, but really the migration has just put all the documents there, and the numbers look good. But I have one at the moment where the numbers look really good. People are opening and closing. However, only 2% of the business are sending links internally, and there's 5% that are sending them externally. That to me does not necessarily mean you've got behavioral change. And we'll have a look at, you know, where do you find some of those statistics? And the other thing is they might be using chat. However, they haven't plugged in, you know, OneNote in Teams. They're not using their To-Do. They're not using Yammer to be able to communicate. Or do they even know that the products are there? Are they using planners to be transparent as part of good collaboration and communication? Where I'm saying they're in Teams, they're doing a great job, but senior leaders are setting up a ton of meetings and they're micromanaging still and phoning people. And I'm getting a lot of managers phoning going, I can't see what anyone's doing. We're constantly in meetings. I'm calling them all the time and no one's answering. It's like, mate, frankly, you've called them how many times today? And I'll speak to a staff and they went, they've called me 12 times. I've given up picking up because I'm actually over it. And I go, right, well, we need a better way of working. We need better transparency, because what happens is if they can't see what you're doing, then, you know, we need better behavioral changes to be able to show what is good collaboration and communication. And if they don't even understand the technology that sits behind it, then it becomes really difficult to bring them on the journey. So then we have a look at then some of this on the journey and start introducing not just teams, but show them some of the different ways that you can do the behavioral change using the technology. Now, technology doesn't come first. First comes the people, then it's a process. So we've got to have a good reason to be using something like Planner as a process. And then what technology are you going to use? Did you use, you know, tasks which is now included in, it's called Tasks Inside Teams. That planner, did you use To Do? Did you use SharePoint lists, for example? Did you use Excel spreadsheets? Did you use Project? Did you use, there's so many different ways. So, but whatever it is that you choose, then, bring it in and introduce. So those are the things that are going to ultimately help them with buy-in when it comes to using something like Teams. So each little component that you put in, they'll go, hey, that's really cool, I could do, and give them a good reason. When I go and I do a training program, often I like to call it more workshopping rather than training. Because if I go, we're going to workshop and we're going to work team by team, and I'm going to spend 2 hours with you asking you, well, how do you collaborate at the moment? Or what are you doing inside Teams? What are the things that you like or maybe don't like? And let me show you a new way of working. Ultimately, I'm still training them. However, I heard them first before I started to train. If I do generic training where I go, come on in, one and all, yes, you can do that, probably a little further down the track though. What I do to start is I bring them together and give them a good reason to go on the journey together to learn, collaborate, and communicate better, along with some behavioral scenario to bring them on the journey. So I do it in sort of clusters, and I would start some of those clusters with senior leadership and showing them the way forward, and then work via teams. And you've also included, of course, change champions then as part across those teams that are helping them once they've done some learning, and then doing ongoing training where you can then do mass. If you are wanting them to use their mobile phone on the go, then show them how to use their mobile phone on the go. It's not enough to show them on the desktop. And I see this as a real failing inside businesses. Go and grab something like, a cable for your mobile phone, and actually present your mobile phone so that they can see what it physically looks like to do something like attaching a document into a meeting or whatever it looks like from the mobile on the go. Help them with that journey. Help them around multi-factor authentication. What does that actually look like? Little videos or snippets or learning or whatever it is, show them from the mobile phone. And the other thing will be is if you're trying to help them to co-author, if I'm training, I can use a document where they can all come in and just type away. I much prefer to go, here's your attendance list, and I'll have their name in there already because I know who's potentially coming on the session, and then I get them to fill out the rest of the document. And it looks like then the race is on, and they love seeing all their little iconography sort of moving across the screen to go, and they've all filled it out. How exciting is that? That's co-authoring it at best. Imagine if I had a piece of paper, how long would this take? And then the moment you finished it, that's now gone to my project manager, and you will receive an email exactly at the end of this session because I know that you actually attended, and they don't have to wait days to receive that thank you and the learning that comes after it. Pen usage, for meetings, for example, if you're going to tell them you want to go down a journey of paper light, and we're going to use Teams, and we're going to use our OneNote, and we're going to use whiteboarding, and then they're going to need the technology. So when you build out these programs, do they have what they need? And I see this happen where they go, we've decided on a tech, and then we come in and a part of the visioning is, we really want to reduce down paper. And I go, well, have they been given pens? And they go, well, no. Have they been given a touch device? Well, no. And I go, well, how are you going to take them down at that good scenario if they've not been given, one, the tools, or two, shown how to? So if you're going to introduce something like the pen, physically get them out with their pen and show them. To then get, adoption and sustainable adoption, we've got some core components. I will often have a way to be able to do the self-serving training. So this is where it goes, because our learning does not stop. It doesn't finish when we walk away at the end of the project. Ultimately, new technology is coming on all the time. In the last couple of months, we've had over 100 updates to Microsoft Teams just in the last couple of months. It is moving so much faster than we've ever seen, and Microsoft are really on the ball and pushing out new technologies. So then how do you keep your audience up to date? Because there's going to be learning and we're going to get behind. So, include one for your champs program. Microsoft have some really good technologies that you can just drop into your team to be able to help in that journey. Things like, what is the news that's coming out? There's a blog. There is a Teams demo. If it's the very first time, then put in some communities where you can go, what's new, or how do I do something? Or, so there are different ways that you can engage, but have a specific team where people can actually go to learn, to know, to understand, to build their skill sets and know what's coming out. And the other thing is teach them to fish. Show them on their screen the fact that you've actually got a help button in the bottom left-hand corner of Teams where they can go and they can do searching and they can do training in there where there are videos, and they can go online and there are guides. That bit of self-serve means then they're not left in the dark all the time. So these are some of the core components in terms of some of those communication avenues. Not only that, but what I'll also do is make sure that I've got a feedback loop, because for ongoing adoption, they've got to be able to ask a question. Otherwise, you are going to get slammed help desks. Now, that sort of champs group, for example, have them that they're actually engaged so that they can send feedback and they've acted on it. So a really good program that I did was we had our change champs sign an agreement. I know it sounds a little tough, but they had a 1-year agreement that they actually signed, that they would be engaged, that they would talk, that they would post something that was a tip, because we forget really quickly the things that we really loved about a program, that they would actually go in and they would regularly engage in and answer people's questions in a how do I do something when it came to asking those questions from the community. No, not only that, not only did they sign it, but they got the sign off from their senior leader, because that then meant they were coming on a monthly meeting where they got told what was new in the technology along the way. We had an owner for those change champions. So we had other ways to be able to communicate and be able to support the business for ongoing adoption. Hints and tips. Great. There's a lot of really great productivity tips that can come along the way, including announcing sessions. We're going to now do a session on for whatever. So those sort of feedback type things where you got your feedback loop, don't forget to act on it. It's not great if there's going to be crickets in whatever group. And I see this happen too many times. So you need someone that's going to be assigned and understands the way to move forward. Now, for those change champions, when you do an agreement, at any point, they do have the right to be able to pull out, don't forget. So they just need to put it through and just say, can you tell us that you're going to be pulling out, and maybe help us to understand the reasons why. Have we not supported you? Just have a form. You got a Microsoft form that they can actually fill out to make it easy for them. When it comes to some of the metrics, and I see a lot of metrics that get done where it's all about the consumption, not necessarily about the adoption and the behavior that comes with it. Microsoft have put out the productivity score insight that you can, be involved and engaged on and included. Now, as part of that, we did as part of my user group, we had the team come in and actually speak to us around some of the differences when it comes to the metrics that are out there, the productivity score, or we're reporting inside 365. That's there on the M365 UG Sway, that bit.ly link. I'm going to be providing all of this so you can go and have a look at it yourself. So what this does, it's a benchmark around, well, one, how are you going inside your business? And two, how does it look like with you up against those that are actually out there? So you can start to see different ways you can transform the way that you work. There's usage reports. Now, don't forget, this is very much about consumption. There are other ways to look at it. You can draw that information into the Power BI usage. There's an app that comes in terms of your usage analytics, which can then start to tell you a little bit more around, and you might have to have a look, and you can download these, export them as PowerPoints, so you can present them back to the business and go, we want to try and increase. So if you're going to do a program, say, I want to increase a very specific metric, go out there, drive a program forward, come back and have a look and see if you manage to shift the metric. And if not, then start to go, well, what could we do a little differently? So some of the resources that are out there, just to close off the session, very close, there's a ton of information around the adoption journey at adoption.microsoft.com. Tons of templates. The learning pathways that you can drop into Teams so you can customize your own learning, videos and program. just use the Microsoft Learning Pathways. You don't have to build a SharePoint site. It is a piece that you can drop in and provision in as a SharePoint site. There are lots of other resources out there on the fast track in terms of the blogs and the roadmaps and tech community to be able to support you along the way. Go to the tech community. We've got a driving adoption piece where you can go and ask questions in there, and a really awesome champions program that's run by Caruana that is every single month, where you can find out lots of really great things around what's new and a lot of really awesome speakers out there. But ultimately, the value of this is only going to be realized when people change the way that they work. Consumption is not enough. Driving them in there is not enough. We've got to give them a good reason to stay, and we've got to help them on that journey and give them an understanding of some of those benefits to get our consumption. So a lot of these links I will have there as part of the program to be able to support you. My very next session is the award winners and how they actually shaped their digital employee experience. By step 2, they've got an international award for digital employee experience. If you'd like to hear it, it's next Tuesday. We're running that at 12 o'clock if you'd like to join Meetup. So the presentation, if you're interested, type this in to your browser and you'll find it there for you, and you'll have all of those links as a PDF. And I'll answer some of the questions that have come in. The communication templates, day in the life of, look interesting, where can we get them? You'll have all of those links there provided as a part of the presentation. Okay, we've got understanding the team by team training, but what if my company is small in size? We have 42 heads in total. Look, often I've gone where I've brought them in. If you think about senior leaders are one group, change champions are one group, often you'll have, teams of finance, and maybe it is 2 people. Is there a way that you can cluster together your scenario where that would work specifically for them? If it is a small business, and I do a lot of it where I go, let's bring us all together, is there one scenario that's going to work where you can do it in bulk together? But if it's not going to work as a scenario in bulk, you'll need to break it down and do, a couple of different sessions. If it is online and virtual, please try to make sure that you've only got 8 to 10 people in total so that it can be interactive. Because seminar being one way is not going to be enough to get people over the fear of using something new. So you want it to be as interactive as you potentially can, where they're also typing in and chatting and using GIFs and playing around with OneNote, playing around with the whiteboard and co-collaborating together. So that's some of the ways that I would recommend. If we don't have any further questions, then thank you very much for joining in, everyone. Hopefully there's been a few things there that will actually help you along the way.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kirsty. And I know a lot of folks have gotten a lot of great insights. So a couple of things that we've gathered here. The communication template, day in the life infographic looks very interesting. Is this something you're going to share to the audience?
So all the links that are actually in the presentation here, so they're all there on the Microsoft site to be able to support you. So you'll have access to the presentation through here, and there's a ton of different links to help on that adoption journey, because Microsoft have got a ton of templates just so you reinvent the wheel. Some really awesome project planners, for example, that are awesome spreadsheets and getting you on that journey.
Great. Another question. I understand the necessity of team-by-team training, but what if my company is small in size? We have at least, last count, only 42 people as a company. So what's your advice on helping drive adoption in this smaller organization?
So yes, I did answer that one for everyone towards the end of how to actually drive that forward. But start with senior leaders, you change champions, and then drive forward on some of the different teams. And as part of that, if you need to do them in bulk, where you do half day with 10, another half day with 10, and do it over 2 days, then that would work as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, again, thank you so much, Kirsty, and a lot of your insights were so valuable. And with that, thanks everybody for tuning into Kirsty's session. What we're going to do at this time, before we jump on to the next session, we'll take a quick, essentially 7-minute break. And once we come back, we'll have Dana Simberkoff talk about how can we have proactive data strategies in unprecedented times of change? So we'll take a short break and then we'll see you in 7 minutes.